We are recording the interview of Agnes Ruth Nischwitz-Ewalt. This interview is being conducted by Ericka Carter from the Wright State University Veterans Voices Project. Also in attendance is Kim Johnson. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. It is 2:08 p.m. November 22nd, 2019. How are you today?
Fine, thank you. And you?
I am good. So you want to be called Ruth, right?
Please.
All right, I can handle that. Where and when were you born?
Lebanon, Tennessee, June 25th, 1957. Do we have to use the year? No.
I won't bring it back up.
Okay.
Okay.
No.
Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My father was Veldon David Shaw, and he worked in electronics and had a furniture and appliance store in our hometown. My mom was Nora Ellen Parrish, was her maiden name, and she ultimately became an accountant, and at 85 is still with us.
So she was an accountant?
Yes.
Huh. That's interesting. Did she go to school for that?
She did. Mm-hmm.
All right.
After she had us.
Okay,
Yeah.
Us. So you have siblings?
I do.
How many, and were any of them in the military?
No one was in the military but me. I have two sisters that are older and a younger brother.
Okay, so 4 of you guys. Mom went off to work. Did she go to work because that was something she felt she wanted to do, or because it was a necessity for the home?
It was probably for her benefit and ours. She's an energetic lady.
Okay.
So.
Okay. And your dad, Mr. Shaw?
Correct.
He owned a
furniture and appliance store in our hometown.
Okay. All right. So did you guys keep all the best appliances at the house?
No.
Oh.
Typical TV repairman. Ours didn't work.
Oh.
But
okay.
yeah, ultimately he retired from the Sumner County school systems. He worked in their maintenance division. That was kind of his final job besides hunting and fishing, which was his passion.
What did you do in high school? Did you have any hobbies, any collections of things that you enjoyed?
Basketball, home economics. Those were probably the most interesting things that I enjoyed. Band, tried the band. No.
What?
I'm not musically inclined.
What instrument?
Clarinet. It was awful.
Did you guys have flutophones?
My older sisters did, but by the time I came along, I think they had all been either burned or hidden or something. When you're the third child, your parents wise up as they go along.
Okay. What happened after high school?
Work.
Where'd you work?
School, Marlene Industries out of New York, and I was a supervisor in the small town where I grew up in Westmoreland. And I worked there until I came into the Air Force. We had a April of 81, and that was pretty consuming, but we had a trucking and excavating business. But the last employment that I had active was with Marlene Industries. I was a little older model when I came into the Air Force. I was 24, almost 25 years old.
So when did you move to New York?
No, the actual factory that I worked in was in our hometown.
Oh, okay.
In Tennessee, where I grew up.
But the business was out of New York?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The company.
Okay. I'm sorry. I was like, wait, did I miss something?
No, the Marlene Industries was out of New York. That was where the company headquarters was located.
And what did they provide?
Women's apparel.
Women's apparel.
Absolutely.
All right.
We made Bobby Brooks and different brands of women's clothing because back in the 70s and 80s, that's when women were really getting to be popular in the workplace. So women's apparel. There was a huge, big demand.
Is that what a lot of women did in your area, go to work at this factory?
They did. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And most of them were machine operators, and they kept the actual production going for the clothing.
Did you get a discount?
No. All the finished products were shipped to the stores.
Okay, so you went into the military a little late. What drove you to go into the military?
I just needed to leave that small town. When I was in 4th grade, I would spin the globe and stop it with my finger, and I would say, I'm going there someday. And I had a teacher that said, if you don't sit down and do your schoolwork, you're never going anywhere. She was right. So I joined the Air Force.
Why that branch?
Sorry?
Why that branch?
Because that was the one that was going to get me around the globe the fastest.
Oh, because they own the planes, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely,
yes. I'd already flown, and I figured out by boat, by plane, what is the quickest, because I didn't really plan to stay. I just wanted to see as much of the world as I could and come back home.
Okay. That would make the most sense. They do transportation the best. Let me jump on that bandwagon. Okay, so you went in 81.
Mm-hmm.
Was it, I know when I went into the Army, we had a guy that was 27, and we called him Grandpa. Well, I never was that way, but they called him Grandpa. Were you one of the oldest in your group?
There were 2 of us.
Did they have any nicknames, or were they respectful?
We were the go-to person for every emotional meltdown and mental challenge that they seemed to come or have to deal with in their lives. She was a couple of years older than I was, and she was in the reserves. I was active.
So you were more the mommy type.
Correct.
How did you feel about that?
It was fine. We didn't mind. I mean, we were pranksters, so that kept it lighthearted and made it easier to deal with.
Were you put in leadership roles more often than not because of your age?
I think ultimately, but in basic training, it's kind of an equalizer. They want to make everyone kind of more on a level playing field. So I don't know. They didn't pick either of us to be. We only had one, I guess, squad leader or whatever she was called. I don't remember. And she was a youngest, smallest, and so I think that was kind of a toughening up experience for her. But
can you? Is there anything about basic training that you can recall that you can share with us?
What year is this? I'm trying to think. Statute of Limitations? No. We were able to attend an Alabama concert. I still have the tickets.
Did you have to pay for it?
No, my great uncle made the arrangements, and 4 of us went to an Alabama concert and saw one of our TIs there. So, needless to say, mom's the word. We never mentioned it. And she still, I would imagine, Laura Lee McGee is probably sitting somewhere going, I knew it was them. But we'd have to find her to find out. But that was, it was, I would say uneventful, but it was fun, interesting, challenging. It was everything you would ever imagine and then some. But because there were some of us that were over 20, it probably changed the dynamics than if we'd all been 18 and just out of high school.
How long was your basic?
6 weeks. I know.
How nice for you.
I was going to say, when you said Army, I'm thinking, oh.
Yeah. Okay, so did you get to choose your job before you went in, or did they choose it for you?
I did. I qualified for basically the spectrum, not because I was smart, but because I tested well. And so I chose electronics first, and I did that. And at some point, they combined the two career fields. There were two career fields that they combined, and turned it into nav aids. So it was initially nav aids, but then they added the maintenance under the diagnostics, and I was in the diagnostic side. And so ultimately, because if you had a guaranteed job, that is just what it was. And when the dynamics changed, you were given choices, and so I chose not to stay in the electronics and ultimately wound up in personnel. But the maintenance portion of the navigational aids, when it combined in, I think October, November, December of '81, that's when those dynamics changed, and the guaranteed job that I was given basically had changed.
How do you feel about that?
It's probably the best thing that ever happened, because frankly, I don't think I would have been very good at it. But personnel gave me a whole different dimension and of the Air Force. So you kind of learn the ropes from being part of them. And it gave you an opportunity to do a lot of things for a lot of people that you wouldn't have had otherwise. You got to celebrate all the good stuff. Retirements, promotions, you name it. And there was some bad stuff that people had that their squadron commanders had to do, but most of them earned it. So.
Where was your school training? Where was your training for your job?
Keesler Air Force Base. That was where I started in electronics, and that's the personnel school was there, so it was just an easy transition to go over to the other hall for that training.
Yeah, so did you move barracks even, or?
Oh my gosh, 81, that was a lot of years ago.
Okay, doesn't matter. Just curious.
I don't even remember.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay, you just reported to a different building.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. All right. And how long was personnel training?
6 weeks, and I think we completed it in 4. I was able to accelerate through some of the blocks. So 4 weeks, I think I had it finished.
Were you just good at paperwork?
Well, because I'd had a job before in HR, personnel and HR, you kind of learn the HR, and I was a supervisor in my previous job, so you learned a little bit about HR,
okay.
But not enough of the Air Force portion of it. Either that or they were just ready to get us out of there.
Where did you go after that? Where was your first duty station?
Grissom Air Force Base, Indiana. And that's where I met Kim. She was a tech, I think, at the time. And she was assigned at Grissom. That was my first duty assignment. That's where I met and married my husband. My son was born there. It was a lot happened in the 3.5, 4, almost 4 years we were there. But Grissom Air Force Base, Indiana.
You were relatively close to home.
Absolutely.
How did your parents and siblings feel about you joining the military?
Supportive. I mean, we could go home often from Grissom.
Where is your husband from?
He was from Ohio, Springfield area, and Fairborn. He was Air Force. He was active duty Air Force too. He had just came back on active duty. But yeah, my family was really supportive of the whole odd and unusual choice I made. But they liked being able to visit wherever we went. It gave them a new place to go.
Okay, absolutely wonderful. So 3.5 years, you made a best friend.
Right.
Now you said she was a tech. What does that mean?
Oh, her rank. That would have been E6.
Oh.
So she had been in a while. And I've always said that between her and Captain back then, Cindy Staub, had it not been for those two, I probably would not have stayed in the Air Force. So they helped me to understand the ropes, if you will. And Captain Cindy Staub was my first commander and my permanent duty assignment that I really did get to know. And we still stay in touch till today. And that was in '82. Okay. So you make a new family when you come in.
Absolutely. You spent 3.5 years there, made new friends, learned your job, husband, son. Now you're dual military. Where do you go after that?
Mildenhall, England.
And your husband is assigned there also?
Absolutely.
What was his job?
He was in civil engineering. He was a projects programming engineer in civil engineering. And when someone decided to change something on the base, whether it was to do an addition to a building or new construction or whatever it was, he was part of the team that was pulled in to actually lay the plans out and work with everybody and make it a reality. So, and he seemed to enjoy what he did.
Okay. Well, I'd hope so.
Oh.
I don't hear very many Air Force folks complaining about their time.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, but, and we were in England for, well, he was there for a little over 3 years, and then we separated and he came back to the U.S. and Adam and I stayed on. Our son and I stayed on.
But how much longer did you stay there?
We left there in 1989. So we were there 6 years. And that's when I came back and Kim and I were reassigned again. This time in Washington, D.C., she was already there. But yeah, when we were in England, I was still in personnel, working at the 3rd Air Force, had some fantastic opportunities there, and was promoted all the way up to the rank that Kim was when I first met her. Of course, by then she had already progressed further, but I made Tech E6 while there in England. And I was with the 3rd Air Force personnel team. The Libyan raid, I was on the battle staff and during the Libyan raid, and then that's where I met the former Secretary of the Air Force too. She was a captain, Heather Wilson. She was assigned there, and a lot of the people that I've stayed in touch with through the years. That's where we met. Each time you have an assignment, it's like you gather more people in your family, but some you keep in touch with more often than others. But the overseas assignments were amazing because that's when you really were more cohesive. Everybody stuck together, and I think of all of the assignments, that's the one where you really, really feel a huge part of the military because of the challenges.
So for our viewers, can you give me a little history lesson about Libya?
Oh, the Libyan raid. It was called Operation El Dorado Canyon, and that was, I have to check the dates. We lost an aircraft coming out, a couple of aircrew members, and it just, I'm not sure what all I can say about it, to be honest with you. I really don't know. It was just, there was a team that was sent in and did what they had to do.
Okay.
But if you can go online and pull up El Dorado Canyon, and that'll give you the idea, Operation El Dorado Canyon, that'll give you an idea of what the genesis was about it. But again, it's like I said, I'm not sure what all I can still say about it.
Okay. What was your favorite part about England?
Travel. Just in the overseas area, you realize it's a chance of a lifetime. You may never get to go back there. So we traveled a lot, and Adam developed an English accent. So it was amazing. It was just to spend the time in and live on the economy, surrounded by people who most of them never even been to the U.S. It was, and you form even a larger circle of friends that become family.
Do you remember spinning the globe and putting your finger on it?
Absolutely.
And like, I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
You're telling your fourth grade self, I made it.
Absolutely. And I mean, between going to Sweden, Ireland, of course, England, Germany, France, and my mom came over with my sister and her bowling partner, and Kim and I bowled in Indiana on teams, and then so my sister, she enjoyed doing that as well. We continued that in England, so we did the traveling bowling team, and oh yeah, it was every day. It was just like check, 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 another dream come true, and or every trip, but that was probably one of the highlights. That and the people that we met along the way.
Were there any times that you really missed home because of something that happened in England?
My grandmother's family was from there, so when I did, I'd make a trip up to North Shields or something, and I went to some of the grave sites and stuff like that. And back then, we didn't have cell phones where you could snap a picture and send it. You could make pictures, and you could wait 2 or 3 weeks to get them developed, and then spend another 2 or 3 weeks mailing them home. But that and phone conversations, being able to pick up the phone and call home, or having them call us.
Which was expensive.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And then, by that time, Adam was already walking, talking, and in school. So it's that typical, early 30s, late 20s, running your legs off trying to get it all done. So you stay really busy, but yes, you do miss home.
Does Adam still have the accent?
He doesn't. Okay. No, he doesn't. But if he's around someone, he'll pick it back up. And that's kind of cute. But
okay. You got stationed in Washington, D.C. Did you request that because Kim was there?
No, actually, I was picked up on a special duty assignment with the Air Force One crew. They were transitioning from one airplane to another, larger aircraft, and they just needed someone. And I think Kim had recommended that I be considered for the job, and lo and behold, I was. And we interviewed in Paris. They came in with for the bicentennial in Paris in, I guess, '89, and so we hopped from England over to France and met them in Paris and interviewed there. And then once it was decided, I had to, and that took a little while, not long, but then I was still at 3rd Air Force, so then we had to talk it over with the 2-star that I worked for, who was very supportive, and then from then it was just a whirlwind of getting cleared out of England, training, trying to get ready to join up with an air crew.
Okay, I'm going to just press pause. I normally don't like to stop vets from talking, but You said that like it was Tuesday and a little cloudy. You worked on Air Force One.
Oh, yeah, ultimately, yes, that was the goal, was to get us trained and to do what we did there.
You worked on Air Force One.
Right. Kim did too.
We gotta take that in. Give us a second. We need to. How cool is that, right? Like awesomeness. All right.
Well, considering the fact that in England we only had 4 channels on TV, and I didn't know anybody on the airplane except maybe Kim and the president. Of course, everybody knew who he was. The picture was in all of our buildings. But other than that, I didn't have a whole lot of knowledge of who these people were, so it made it a lot easier, the transition.
Okay. So, okay, let's get back into the transition, and then I want to hear all about what an average day was like working Air Force One. So the transition moved rather quickly once you were approved. You had to process out of England, head over to Washington, D.C., and your son is going with you. How did he feel about this? Was he old enough to have feelings? He should have been 9, no, 8, 9, 10, right?
He was 6.5, almost 7.
Oh, okay.
And it was just another adventure for him. And he actually took a solo flight from London to Atlanta, and my dad met him there. And he thought that was pretty cool. So he flew ahead of me with an escort, of course. And he got to spend about a month with his granddad, so that was just everything he ever wanted to do. That gave me a chance to get the physiological training and all the stuff done in Wiesbaden, Germany, and then come to D.C.
Physiological training to work on Air Force One?
I'm sorry?
You said physiological training?
For air crew. You take the air crew training.
Do tell.
Oh, you go up in an altitude chamber to determine how your body reacts when you're deprived of. It's typical for, I would think, most air crew. I don't know. This was the only one I ever did. So, but you have to determine how your body will react when it's oxygen deprived, and that allows you as a crew member to identify, hey, we have a problem with the oxygen, or whatever, and we jokingly said it also kind of establishes your barf level. At what point do you throw in the flag? But that, and then vertigo, you have to be able to recognize the signs of vertigo, and it's just a pretty comprehensive training that they put you through as a crew member. And I would think that probably commercial air, I don't know who else uses it, but it's a reoccurring training for air crew. Wasn't that long, I don't think, as I can recall. But you have a physical exam, all those things you have to get through.
And this took about a month?
I think so. By the time all the out processing was done, shipping over household goods, everything, it was kind of on warp speed, so.
Were the hours like 9 to 5 that you were doing this, or 7 to 3? I don't know how you.
Well, my career may be a little different than some, but then most that I've worked with weren't. I don't think we really had established hours. You did however long, you worked at it however long it took, and it didn't. It was a lot of appointments. And are you talking about whenever we transitioned out, or whenever we were in D.C.?
I'm talking about just right now when you were transitioning out during this physiological training and stuff like that.
Yeah, you still had your primary job to do and everything. So you just did as much of it as you could, as quickly as you could, and then you to still keep your job up to speed. So that's why Adam needed to come back to the U.S. to stay with his granddad. So it freed me up to do whatever hours we needed to do.
When did your replacement come, or did you train someone else to do your part?
I think there was a group effort kind of to
take over.
Right. And we had just gone through some pretty heavy transitions a few months before. So the new staff hadn't gotten worn out yet. So, and then we had a couple of civilians, and they managed to pick up the slack, and after that, honestly, I didn't have time to look back and see. It just, you had to move forward. You knew the next assignment, and you went on it. And things, hopefully, were in pretty good shape when I left. But I don't remember a lot of that transition. Sleep deprivation does that.
Okay. I imagine you slept on the plane when you went to D.C.
Oh, every chance I got.
Okay. You arrive in D.C. Does Kim pick you up from the airport?
I stayed with her for the first month until we could get into base housing.
Okay.
So you do that a lot in the military. And she and her husband allowed me to come and stay with them, and then base housing opened up and everything went back to normal, somewhat.
When did Adam come back?
He came back when we were moving into base housing, and my grandmother, I'd made several trips to see him in Tennessee during that time. Every time we'd come in, I'd head to Tennessee for the weekend.
Okay.
So,
when did you start on Air Force One, and what was that like?
oh my gosh. Well, the plane was still in development, so we were doing the training on 26 and 27,000. Not long after I got there, the security clearances had to come through. So I didn't initially start on I was doing the flying piece of it, and then we would go to Wichita and test what was to be the new airplane, and then come back to DC, and then the mission was still going on with the older aircraft, the two 707s. They were still being used, and we were testing the 747s. So everybody was just trying to orchestrate schedules that were, I guess if we look back at them, they may have looked almost impossible to do, but you did it. You had to. The whole process was in transition.
What was your favorite plane?
Favorite plane?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
What favorite Air Force One?
2829, the new ones. That's the ones we flew on the most. 26 and 27 were limited in technology, and the whole secretarial unit. And it was a Xerox memory writer. It's right here in the museum at Wright. And those were just memory writer typewriters, no computers on board. So you can imagine the newer technology was a lot better and speeded things up considerably. It was a beautiful, beautiful airplane. Absolutely. But it's not like your transient type, sit down in your seat and read your magazine. It has workstations and typewriters, copiers, fax machines. It's a working airplane.
Literally.
Yes. And you didn't get on board expecting to just sit there and sleep or watch the weather. You had work to do on the plane as well.
So what kind of work did you do?
Administrative personnel. I was personnel. Kim had the administrative side of it more so than me. But evaluations, the crew had evaluations just like everyone else in the Air Force. So you had to process those, you had to QC them, you had to make sure that they were grammatically correct and in the proper format. And there was awards, decorations, anything that the HR side did, then that was part of the job too, was you had to keep that going for the air crew and the maintenance personnel. So if there wasn't anything to do on the White House side, you always had your other folder for the aircrew side. So there was things to do on board the airplane that was to support the aircrew and the mission, and you knew what those were, but then if you ever got a break from that, then you also had the other folder.
So did you ever bring the president his coffee?
Flight attendants. We have flight attendants that did an amazing job with all that. They never trusted me with the food or anything electronic other than a typewriter or the other office type equipment. Yeah, no, I wasn't. I don't do well with food. So, but they did amazing jobs. Paperwork, yes, but not food.
How often did you interact with the president?
Very rare, but on occasion, yes. If he had a stack or something that he wanted to discuss, or if the speechwriters had speeches that had to go forward, and then they went through the senior staffer, and the senior staffers had kind of signed off on them that they were okay, and then if there were changes to be made, then we would get them back and make the changes. So that was that part of the process. Before, we had to put them on the index cards. They had to be typed in orator font, and these half sheets of index cards, and those were handed off to him just as reference, so he could flip through those. Thank you letters. There were always tons of those to do. Changes, if there was an itinerary change or something like that, you had to do the events card that was for all the passengers so they knew what was next. So that was kind of the extent of it. It was more administrative support from the White House side of it, and then personnel from the crew side of it.
Let me see how to word this. On average, how many flights a week would you say you did?
It would depend. We'd tag up, and yeah, the beauty of it was that you didn't have to be on every single flight on the primary aircraft. You'd sometimes be on the backup, which on the backup plane, you didn't get sidelined with a lot of other stuff that was happening on the primary because there's two planes. If you were on the overseas trips or something and you were on the backup, then you could focus more. But again, it would depend on the schedule. I mean, after Desert Shield, Desert Storm kicked off, there was a period of time when we didn't fly hardly at all. It was with President Bush, 41. So there was an extended period of time when the ops tempo dropped pretty dramatically, and that was kind of nice because you got to be home with your families. But after that, it kind of picked up, and then during election years, which I wasn't a part of, Kim was the part of it, and she'll be able to tell you more about that. I think the ops tempo was pretty rigorous, but I mean, if a typical day, you could go to 2 or 3 cities or more a day and then be back home that night, but it was long days sometime. And on overseas trips, you may hit, 5, 6 countries, 4, 5, 3, 2, however many. And I think the longest trip was like 19 or 20 days, something like that, in, overseas. But you knew your schedule ahead of time, and that was the priority. So, and the weeks varied. So, but you were connected by a beeper.
Okay. How long were you on Air Force One?
We were doing the testing and stuff, I think in 89, early 90. And then I left, I think, 92 maybe-ish. I transitioned over to, I'd requested to be released because, well, my son was getting older. I didn't want to leave him, and I wanted to go home. There was some health issues with some of my family members. I just wanted to go home. I felt like, okay, I've been to 38 countries. I'm done. It wasn't so much that as it was the health issues, and I just didn't really know what to do from there. So HR came back into the picture, and I went over to the local military personnel flight, worked there for a while, and then a job opening came up in Nashville. And that's when I moved back home. And I stayed there for the next 6 years. So that would have been in 93. is when I went to Tennessee. But I had already left the air crew and was at the local MPF for a while.
So Nashville is particularly close to
Home, where I grew up.
Okay.
Westmoreland, Tennessee, a big city with probably, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 people in it. I'm being facetious, it wasn't that big. Yeah, there was only like 20 something or maybe 30 in my high school class. So,
Wow.
very small town. Now you know why it was so significant when the 4th grade teacher sat there and said, no, 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 you're not.
Did you live back in that small town and commute to Nashville, or did you stay in Nashville and go to work?
Oh, initially I moved back because I already had a house in that town. So I moved, I'd done a renovation on it, moved back there. And then as Adam had been in private schools and British schools, and small town, didn't fit in. Name like Nischwitz, not from around here, of course, sort of thing. So I transferred him over to private school, and we moved to Lebanon, the place I was born. So we lived there and then commuted from there. So it was all within a 45-minute commute to the office in Nashville.
You were still in the Air Force, of course.
Correct.
There's an air base in Nashville?
No, actually, it was a 332nd Recruiting Squadron,
Oh, okay.
and I went in there as their administrative resources person.
Okay. Thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, Nashville. There is one in Arnold. It's a little further away.
Okay. Okay. And you did that for
6 years.
6 years. That seems like a long time. You pull some strings to do that?
I was good at what I did.
Okay.
That was, but yeah.
And how old is Adam when you finish that term?
Oh my gosh. When I came back to DC, to the Pentagon, he was a sophomore in high school. So
after recruiting, you went back to DC?
correct, to the Pentagon. Not a good time. Because he was in high school, he had formed friends, he was doing well in school, everything was fine. But I was pulled back to the Pentagon. I had an assignment there with 18 years in service. And so I didn't have enough time to retire.
He couldn't have stayed at home with your sisters, brother, mom, dad?
Ultimately, he did. Because when he came to DC with me, it was in December, January timeframe. It was at the middle of the school year, which made it even worse. And the school that we had chosen to put him in there was nothing like advertised. So then he opted to go back to Friendship Christian, and I let him. My parents were there. I mean, the whole family was there, and he had been there for 6 years.
And I'm sure he could drive, so it wasn't...
He could.
Yeah, he wouldn't have been a burden on someone to have to get up and take him to school. And I wish my daughter would get her driver's license. She's just like, if I get a driver's license, I'll have to drive you around. I'm like, but isn't that fair?
Right.
I've been driving you around for 16 years.
Absolutely. I said, you're a mom, you're a chauffeur, you're a cook, you're a seamstress, you're a doctor, you're a nurse, you're a psychiatrist, you're it all. You have to be.
Right.
So.
Love her to death, though. I'm sure you love Adam.
I'm sorry?
I said, I'm sure you love Adam to death.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about the Pentagon. So you've been requested at the Pentagon, or?
It was a chief quality of life. They used to have a quality of life position there, and that ultimately got rolled into another program, and then I became the chief of the Air Force Uniform Board within a period of time, shortly after I got to the Pentagon, because again, the Air Force in its fluid environment changed it from the quality of life office. I can't even remember what it was called, something about total force something. But in the meantime, the chief of the uniform board left. Well, as I said earlier, I started out in clothing. So somebody thought it'd be cool if I did that job. And I should have known when my predecessor left 2 bottles of wine under the desk with a note that said good luck. But I did that, enjoyed it, and met the people here in Wright-Patterson. And just phenomenal program that the depth of it, no one really understands. It's not like you can just go to Walmart and pick up your uniform, or JCPenney's or any of the other stores and pick up a uniform. It's not that at all. You have to deal with everything from the Berry Amendment to you name it. These uniforms have to be made in the U.S. and meet specifications, and unbelievable. So I did that for from 2000 until 2003. That was toward the end of 2003. So, and again, that laid the foundation for another job, but I left the Pentagon in 2003 and went over to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, not as an agent, as a support person in their HR, back into the HR world. Human resources personnel. So, and that's where I retired in 2007, was from OSI.
I feel like you're just like skipping over the fact that you were at the Pentagon during 9/11.
Yeah, there was that. Not a good day. Not a good day in the life and times of this country.
Can you tell me about that, or we're not going to talk about it?
No, I mean, it was an odd day, to say the least. It started out odd, and it ended odd. But we were watching the towers on the TV in our conference room, and we had I was in 5C 238. That's, for perspective, you know, the 2 and 3, 4 and 5. The plane came in here, we're here on this wedge. The saving grace is it hit, if there is one, is that it hit on the part that had been renovated. So the steel beams and all the structure was reinforced. And so that didn't allow it to penetrate through into the courtyard or anything like that. It wasn't ideal situation, but it was probably, had it hit on any of the other wedges, you probably wouldn't be having very many conversations with people at the Pentagon. But as soon as it happened, we sort of knew. But after watching it on the TV in the conference room, I had a meeting, and we were heading to that. And Angie, she was a stay-in school. We hired people, college students, to come to the Pentagon. It gave them job experience in the whole 9 yards, and they were called stay-in schools, and Angie was with me, and we were walking to the next meeting, and then it was like the building shook, and this horrible noise that was much louder than when they turned on the furnace. So then we turned and went back, because whatever it was, we knew it was just not right. So when we came back in, everybody else was just trying to, like us, figure out what was going on. And then, of course, the alarms were going off, so we all just made our way out. And you couldn't call anyone, you couldn't do anything. You just had time to grab your purse and whatever you could get and go. And as we were coming down the staircase, they were pretty well jammed. And we had a new person that had just joined the team. And again, prankster and using humor. His name was Bruce Lovely. Batman was his nickname, Colonel Bruce Lovely. And the look on his face, and it was like, but a lot of people had that shocked look, you know, and I just made the comment. I said, well, how do you like it so far? And what else could you do? I mean, then we were all kind of trying to get out the door and trying to make phone calls. You couldn't. We had no idea what had happened. The press wasn't even there yet, but we knew it wasn't good. And so we're walking out, I couldn't call my husband across I'd remarried, and I couldn't even call him. He was across the river, Potomac, but I could call Tennessee. So I called my son's school, and the girl at the office got him on the phone, and the only thing I had time to tell him was to call your grandparents and tell them I'm fine. And he's like, okay, Mom, why? Okay, I can do that. And I said, just do it. Just hang up the phone right now, call them, and tell them. So he did. So my parents didn't have to go through that. But there were others that did. So we finally made our way back to the trains. I think they started running several hours later. But in that gap of time, when we finally got out of the building, you could see what had happened. Because literally, our wedge was here at the front of the building. This was here, and in order to get out, you had to go under a tunnel that goes under the highway. That's your way out to Army Navy Drive. There's a mall and everything over there. So when you were working your way there, you could see it wasn't, whatever had happened wasn't very good. So we get across there, we get out, and it's just dead silence. And if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., it's never dead silent, but it was. You could hear people's car radios in the parking lots. And that's how we knew what was going on. It was the only way we knew. You couldn't call anybody, nobody could call you. So we're walking through the parking lots. Finally, we heard that the metro was reopened, so we were able to get back to it. And that's when my husband found out. All the time, he had no way of knowing. He couldn't call anybody, nobody could call him. My son couldn't even call him. So he found out when I literally walked off the metro, however many hours later, at like 6:30 or 7 in the evening. So, and then after that, the next day, I think, the next day or the following day, we set up a family crisis care center, and that was at the Sheridan. So I went to work there. They wouldn't let us back in our part of the building. I don't even think that anybody was able to get back in the building for a while. But our part was, they had to get structural engineers and all that stuff in there and make sure that it was okay. But we set up an office over there for the ones that were still missing. So we did a lot of tracking and accountability and trying to figure all of that out. And then there would be like battle staff meetings and stuff later to try to figure out the other part of the equation is, what do we do now? From the military perspective, you've got the casualty assistance piece, but the military still moves on. So there was that piece too. Again, you were part of different missions, if you will. So, and that was kind of the turning point. It's when we lost our innocence, our childlike innocence. All the pranks stopped, all the life as we knew it just screeched. And everything was serious. I mean, like dead serious. So, and then in 2000, between the battle staff and going back and finally getting back into the Pentagon, getting our stuff, getting moved out, the renovation, they continue the renovation with the Pentagon, record speed, great people. Amazing work. It looks wonderful. We moved back into the Pentagon, but it was a few years later. Our office, the uniform office, didn't move back in for a few years, and by that time I was a civilian because I had already transitioned over to OSI in 2003. I had gone over there to work in their military personnel flight. And I did that for 4 years.
What's OSI?
It's the Air Force Office of Special Investigations.
Oh.
The colonel that I worked for in the A1 in the DP office, I had known him from England, John Miller. And he had made 06. He was a colonel. And he was there. And he had a position open, and my time was almost up at the Pentagon. So I just slid across to Andrews Air Force, back to Andrews Air Force Base again, and worked there with that group of people. Amazing mission, awesome people, but post 9/11 we started having casualties that were kind of unique in so much that the OSI team is a mix of military and civilian. So there was a lot of things that I don't think that the American military was ready to deal with, and that was civilian casualties that were actively in the fight, because it's not like conventional warfare. No Geneva Conventions, no Articles of War, none of that stuff applied. So we had some agents that were killed. And so I worked in the MPF, transitioned from that up to the Commander's Action Group, worked with the Wounded Warrior Program to try to determine how to handle some of these things. How do we handle it from the time someone's injured until they literally get to their staging facility where they're going to stay, and ultimately can be the release from active duty. So we worked through that with the CAG. Lots of people, lots of folks on the team, fun stuff. Not fun stuff, but you know what I mean. You're making things happen. You're getting to see things firsthand. Again, amazing people. But then I retired in 2007 from the Air Force. But that job set me up for what was next, which was lobbying for the military and for the wounded, to try to get the legislation changed that affected people who were wounded, and how can they make that transition? How can we as a service put them out of the military in these conditions without the resources and the background that they need? So I did that. Literally took off my uniform on Friday and walked into the office on Monday and was on the Hill on Tuesday. So that was kind of a fun job because it was worthwhile. You knew at the end of the day you were like that little drop of oil on a big cog, or you could be. So that was probably, for even if it was a short period of time, it was just one of the most gratifying, I guess, because you knew you couldn't make huge waves happen without some push and some support. And the 110th Congress was very, very supportive of all of the initiatives that we pushed forward.
That's awesome.
So,
a few things.
mhm.
You said you had a new husband.
Yes.
When did he come along and where'd you meet him?
Oh my gosh. Well, I had known his sister from when I was in Andrews before. We had been best friends since 89 or 90. And her son and my son were best friends and had martial arts classes and all of that. And so fast forward, her brother was in California. I had no idea about him. I just knew he existed. But his two sisters and I were very good friends. And one was in Pennsylvania and one was there in Maryland. So we co-parented with each other's kids and did all kinds of stuff. And then, of course, all these other occurrences happened in our lives, and we had all this wonderful stuff that happened. And lo and behold, I come back in 2000 to Washington, D.C. In the meantime, they had lost their parents, and the girls had just about convinced their brother to move to D.C. but I had no idea. I mean, it was like, okay. And the first time we met, it was like, oh, you must be Steve. Nice to meet you. And it was kind of like, now just go away. Because he was in California, and the girls and I, we had been close. So it was like, we were sisters, and you're just somebody from... So we hung out, and actually it was our kids who decided that we should really think about having some kind of a relationship, and maybe even thinking about getting married. You know, it wouldn't kill you. And so he had a daughter. He has a daughter. And then she and Adam were like co-conspirators. And all the way through college, and even today, it's still skeptical. I'm not sure they're not still doing it. But but I met him through them. Okay. And the rest is kind of history. Now he hangs out in Tennessee with me. He's retired. So, and that's been, oh my gosh, how many years ago?
How did he feel about your military, and he's been supportive and moved with you and all those things?
Oh, he's fine. His dad was military, and his father was a command sergeant major in the Army. So he knew all the lingo and knew about it. He used to go with me, TDY, and separately, of course, and we would rent a car, and then I would have the government rental car, and he'd have our rental car, and he'd tool all over Germany or wherever I happened to be. And because he grew up, he graduated high school in Mons, Belgium. So he knew the ropes.
Respectable.
Yeah.
Very respectable. Okay, so when I hear you lobbied, just for my own curiosity, is that a paying job?
It is. Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're Air Force Sergeants Association. It was a position with the Air Force Sergeants Association, and they have a registered lobbyist position. And you can be the director or deputy director of the military office there, and I did that for that brief transition period from the time you leave the military until you figure out what you want to be when you grow up.
And what did you be when you grew up?
I went right back to the Air Force, Pentagon, right back into the uniform office. Okay. That's how I finished my career. Right. 10 years at that.
10 years at the civilian side,
mm-hmm.
using the same knowledge you had when you worked there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So it's full circles in more ways than one. It's full circles.
And do you still, you retired, so
right.
Where do you live now?
Tennessee.
Back in Tennessee?
Mm-hmm.
All right, in that renovated home?
Absolutely. Not the one that we did back in the 89 to 93. We were crazy and bought another one in 2014, and then by the time I retired in 2017, it was completely done. Well, except for some minor stuff. But, yeah.
There's always a project with a new home.
Absolutely.
Or new to you.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Have you felt like you have needed to readjust yourself to being retired? As
no,
a civilian.
Thanks to some people, I don't really get to know what retirement might be like. No, coming up with new projects like Air Force One reunions and stuff like that, Christmas parties.
So those are some of the things that you're doing now?
Yes, that's why we're here. We're doing the Air Force One reunion for 2020, August of 2020, and working with the museum and stuff like that. But yeah, I think you learn new things. You keep going. You don't retire from something. Someone told me you don't retire from something, you retire to something. And so you just take whatever you know and wherever you can help, and you do it. I mean, we've learned a lot. We've been blessed to have had the experiences we've had. Not all have been great, but it makes you who you are.
Are you a part of any other veterans organizations?
Not now, not right, not the PAG, Presidential Airlift Group. They have an informal Facebook group that we're all kind of part of, community stuff. But no, not a formal member that I go and meet with other military members other than the reunions.
What are some life lessons that you've learned from your military service?
Stay flexible. And don't be afraid to ask. Ask questions. And help when you can. I mean, use those talents. While our life may not be explainable to other people in a way that they can even comprehend, and our kids, if I could say to anyone, when your kids are part of it, and my husband brings it to light all the time. As a normal child, I grew up in a small town. I had the same people in my class all the way through. But when you're a military brat, or you're in the military, those dynamics change often. And you've got to learn to let go, and you've got to learn to hang on. But the one thing is, your world's different. And you can't expect everybody to understand it. They didn't live it. So what you do is just try to share with them the part you think they can understand. But you ask a lot of questions and try to find out about them. And hope they don't ask you a whole lot about you. No.
Do you think that's true for Adam?
I do, yeah. He can probably tell you one of his, he can probably tell you how many kids, how many dogs, cats, canaries, every single patient he has. And because he pulls that out of them. And he's a dentist. That's not something that people like to do. But if you read on his Facebook page, his patients pretty well like it. He's there at ease. And it's a knack you try to foster in your kids.
I agree. How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
I don't know who would agree and really don't care, but there's things that are necessary. There are things that are necessary in life to sustain life. And if war is inevitable, I would like to see a day when things progress where it's not, where that's not the answer. That's not the go-to, ever. Will we get there? I don't know. But that would be ideal life. But from the past perspective, people make decisions. And they make decisions in anger and in haste. And they're usually not the right ones. But
is there anything you feel we haven't discussed that you would like to add to this interview?
Not that I can think of. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But yeah, it's been interesting, and you've certainly provoked some thoughts that haven't crossed through my brain in more than a few years.
Okay.
But
have we talked about the whole body of you?
oh, there's some jerks and quirks in all of us. But yeah, it's been 36 years of my 62 years in this world. And I don't know of anything that I could have, would have, or maybe should have done different. A lot of things I probably should have done different. But no.
No regrets?
No.
Good.
Yeah.
Yay.
You can't go back and change it. You can't.
Yeah.
And it is what it is.
Okay.
So.
All right. One last question. What message would you like to leave for future generations who will hear or see this interview?
Be kind to each other. Be considerate. Think before you speak. Actions speak louder than words. And we're all different, and we're entitled to be. Respect people for those differences. And don't be afraid to look them in the eye and say, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you, but that's okay. All the bickering and whatever it is, military, politics, life in general, just live this day like it could be your last. because you never know when that's going to come. And think about the legacy you want to leave behind. Is it angry or kind?
Excellent points. Excellent points. I wish you the very best with the reunion you are planning. I know that they are big events to plan, and I'm sure it's going to go amazingly. That concludes our interview with Ruth Nischwitz-Ewalt. Thank you for your time today and for your military service.
Oh, thank you for everything.